Good day, my relatives. Good day, my friends. I raise my hand to say hi to our honorable guests here today, to those who traveled near and far to be here. Honor the traditional lands that we live, work, and play on, which is the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt, as well as our relatives in Wasinich territory.
Increasingly, the role of the Inclusion Project, as we see ourselves, is to become a community of communities, essentially to be a collaborative community where, regardless of what language or what story you have to tell, you find yourself, where we create spaces for people to find their shared stories. We want to be able to create opportunities for people to partner together and to see how to together move forward. It's been such an honor and a great privilege for me to lead some conversations, to connect with community in a very unique way.
What kwano wardadun so gwegon tagatsitsa nega ne yojats kanyaka haga kano gardono ni doganyo kano oscar dewage soskahone bogit derdoza. Good afternoon. My name is Degat Tsitsanega Everest. I hail from the Mohawk Nation of Kahnawake. I'm a proud member from our Bear Clan, specifically from our Soskohone bloodline. It's an absolute honor to be here.
I am the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, breaking Rule 1 by telling you my organization instead of who I am, but I'm speaking from that perspective, so you'll see how it all ties together here. So the Chamber started in 1863, which was 20 years after the arrival of the people who founded Fort Victoria on this location. And in fact, one of the first members of the Chamber was also one of the first people who arrived in Victoria with James Douglas, who was the first governor of the territory, of the colony. And that chamber member was the company, because chamber members are joined in companies, not individuals. That chamber member was the firm of Lowe Brothers, owned by Thomas and James Lowe. And I know quite a bit about them because they are my great uncles on my mother's side. And then James became one of the founders of the chamber in 1863 and president of the chamber in 1867, which is the year that Canada was founded. At the time he was president, I can pretty much guarantee you that 100% of the membership of the chamber was white and male. And they were effective advocates for many things that built the economy of the city. If you look back at the history of what the chamber was involved in, you name it, the chamber was a part of it. The Empress Hotel, UVic, mail service, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's astonishing. But I have to say, in the work that I've done over the last few years to understand the chamber's history, in those archives, I have not run across a single mention of a relationship with, a joint project, a conversation, an engagement with the Songhees or Esquimalt or any of the other Indigenous peoples in the area. Quite the opposite. The attitude certainly was that all land and resources were at their disposal, the disposal of the white settlers and their government. So yes, I definitely am here to say the historical role of the chamber certainly has been part of the problem for First Nations over the last well, I'm not going to say 150 because my messages, things have changed. And they were not of particular help for any non-white newcomers. And the Japanese apology that was mentioned at the outset is a good example of many apologies that can be given. In James Lowe's time, I'm going to say that being influential meant being part of a small insider group that held and wielded power, and diversity was not their goal. It was about exclusion, it was not about inclusion. So, 150 years later, I'm here, 2019. What are my observations about what has changed? So I'd like to start with the work that the Chamber has done just recently on our vision. So the Chamber's vision is that we want to be the most diverse and influential business association in the region. So when the board worked on that vision last year, The most important word for us was diverse, because we wanted to explicitly redefine what the term influence meant. So again, we said we want to be the most diverse and influential business association. So as opposed to the historical use of that term influential, we are very, very much in the process of redefining it to say that the definition of an influence is that the more people join you, the more influence you have. And by people, we mean every definition of people. So private, public, not-for-profit businesses, people who run large organizations, small businesses, every in sector, every industry, and definitely those who come from diverse personal and cultural backgrounds. Absolutely, Indigenous people, newcomers, people of different ages, genders, colors, cultures. The more diversity we have, the more reach we have, the more influence we have. And this is also very much becoming the reality of Victoria as a city, and it now and absolutely for the foreseeable future. Because the main thing that we hear from the employers who are our members is that they don't have enough workers. So absolutely the future is going to hold a much greater diversity of workers for our economy, and they are going to be coming from all over the place. We are becoming a more multicultural community, and that is going to accelerate.
We talk about power. Do you think that when we add those check boxes to our applications, or we try and do these initiatives that try and change the structures, is it kind of just like a band-aid solution where it actually isn't relinquishing power, it's trying to maintain it?
It's advancing your own power.
Okay.
Because there's nothing more powerful than bringing somebody in but holding them in their place, right? And not standing up and taking accountability. When you take accountability and you start to pull back your own power, and you start to go into a place where you have to understand that your power comes from somebody else's trauma and your power is rooted in somebody else's oppression, that's when you can then start to make that shift, and it hurts. It doesn't feel good.
I'm the daughter of white British immigrants. My parents came here in 1970 and had me in 1979. I'm the mother of 2 little girls. I'm the CEO of an organization. I am on this land, and how did I come to receive the privilege and the so-called rights that I have? How will I pass these on to my daughters? And how am I running my organization? How did I get here? But more importantly, at what cost did I get here? At whose expense did I get here? If I have this privilege, then where did it come from? Why did I get it? And most importantly, how has it contributed to the individual and collective experiences of Indigenous people today? So when we hosted the forum, the intention was to hear stories, ideas, perspectives. And when we gather in spaces like we are in today, we acknowledge that we have people who are giving their time, but more importantly, they're giving their hearts and their minds so that we can hear their experience. So we ask everyone in the room to speak their truth. And somebody asked earlier that we all be vulnerable and that we share. And so I will do that. I will be vulnerable and I will share with you. I have had pain in my life. My oldest daughter, when she was 11, was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 2. My youngest daughter, who is 2.5, was just diagnosed with autism. I had mental health issues. I had postpartum depression. And I'm now going through a divorce because of all of that. I have had pain in my life, but I have had every privilege given to me to cope with that pain. Medical professionals who provide medicine and treatment based on my cultural norms. Psychological counseling that is rooted in my own Angler settler version of the world. Access to education and the privilege that comes with being white, Canadian-born, middle-class, educated woman. Are we checking a box? Are we paying lip service? Are we saying, here, this is what we're going to say, do nothing about it, and then just go about our day? Structure our organizations in the same way. Carry on with the same institutions and the same institutionalization of the way that we do our work. And so this was not sitting well with us, and this is not sitting well with us, and this is something that we are working on. So as an organization, particularly an organization that exists because of migration to unceded territories, ancestral lands that are not hours to invite people to. How do I navigate this complexity? And so you will see I have a lot of questions, right? Everything I'm saying ends in a question, because we're still figuring out what we don't know. So when we had to sit and write a proposal to do this work, we had to try to come up with programs, inputs, outputs, outcomes. And when we don't even know what the questions are that we need to ask, how are we supposed to pull that together? So before we can recognize what we do know and then mindfully take steps forward to decolonize ourselves, decolonize our workplaces, we need to investigate the questions first and then look at what the possible answers are. So as the CEO of AMSA, I have committed to engaging in this process in the following ways. That understanding and feeling my experience in this land in relation to Indigenous presence, so that I can, for example, center those land acknowledgements or territorial acknowledgements in reality. Right? Understanding the shared history that I have with the original inhabitants of this land, and then the consequences that have ironically put me in a favorable spot over those who have been here since time immemorial. Understanding that even when I feel like, well, it was not me, I didn't do it, oh, it happened hundreds of years ago, and similar phrases that we all hear, that there are things such as collective harm, collective privilege, and collective trauma, which I am a part of today, and it all stems from the same place. Understanding that it is necessary that I do my work in building my accountability to this land as a white woman, as a leader of an organization in the immigration sector in Canada, and then all that comes with that.
I just want to start with a quote that will make sense a bit later. Our people have no desire, under any circumstances, to see our Aboriginal title and rights extinguished. Our people consistently state that our Aboriginal title and rights cannot be bought, sold, traded, or extinguished by any government under any circumstances. What questions present themselves to us and our organization? How do we take a step back to critically reflect on who we are as non-Indigenous people and organizations in relation to Indigenous presence in these unceded lands? And this is a tricky one because we all have different stories, cultural backgrounds, migration paths to this land, and so forth. It is also tricky because in a case like myself, and people who come from colonizing countries, how do we go about that critical reflection without making it about ourselves, which is our collective historical tendency, by the way, but making it enough about ourselves so we don't remove ourselves from responsibility. Example, well, I'm not Indigenous, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything until they tell me what to do. But then if things go wrong, then I can say like, oh, they told me to do it that way, so I can remove myself from responsibility once again. So in AMSA, for example, the affiliation of multicultural service societies, we have it all. We are multicultural, we are service agencies, so the most normal step for us would be to use the tools we already have in place and adapt what we do to support and serve Indigenous people within the reconciliation process. But again, more questions. Is that our role? Does the fact that we know how to serve newcomers give us legitimacy to serve Indigenous people? Why? What would Indigenous people say we have to do? What can we advance their interest in our relationships? That for the most part, those relationships are also based in an unbalanced power relationship, which is also what we are discussing here. So that's a lot of the questions that we have. It is our work to really focus so much on let's work with Indigenous people, or do we have a lot to do in working with non-Indigenous people as non-Indigenous people to bring all these issues forward? And one important question talking about multiculturality and reconciliation is how do we reconcile, or even just bring to the table, our mandate of multiculturalism in this area of reconciliation, knowing what we know about land return and Indigenous self-governance.
I think it's an interesting thing with reconciliation because I think nobody actually knows what the outcome is. We've got a word, but we don't really have a picture. But I kind of feel like we're in a process that is it's iterative. We're going to be going around this for quite a while till we get to a place where people feel more comfortable. But that's not ever going to include everybody feeling comfortable. It's
A supervisor would say, our intern is so shy and quiet. I'm like, I talk to the intern, they're like, oh my God, I'm the least shy person you know. I just don't want to be disrespectful. There's not enough time for me to talk. People are talking over each other, and that's not my culture, and I don't want to be disrespectful, so I'm quiet. So when we make time to pause, for example, if I ask a question, and I learned this from youth, is to count to 20 in my head. And then that gives time for people to gather their courage or gather their thoughts, to take a breath, to contribute. Another example of agreements around that pausing and inclusion of youth, I had one intern early on in the year come to me and say, oh, you know, at our bi-weekly check-ins, I just don't feel heard. People are talking over each other and interrupting, and I don't feel heard, and I don't really want to be there as if if we were to stay like this. So we talked about, like, what is a strength-based way that we could address this? So we talked about it, and then at the next bi-weekly check-in, when we asked, is there any agreements we'd like to offer for our time together? They're like, yeah, could we show respect for each other by honoring each other's words with silence? And people were like, yeah. So we started to do that, we didn't need to be like pointing out that Sally's always cutting off everyone. And now the neuroscience shows that when we give feedback in a way that's strength-based and positive, it activates the neurons in our prefrontal cortex. So it puts us in our planning, thinking, compassionate brain. So we're more likely to get the behavior change that we're hoping for than if we were to give it in a negative shame, blame approach, like, Sally, you're always cutting me off. When you do it that way, it activates the neurons in your amygdala. So the response you are likely to get are either fight, flight, or freeze. Did I do them right? Right. So you're not going to get the behavior change. And I know that was a hard one for me. I grew up here in Victoria, I told you, and I had quite a privileged education, and yet at the same time I never was taught how to communicate in a way that felt safe for me or others. And then I stumbled upon nonviolent communication, put that into practice, and found that when it really helped. But at first when I learned about it, I was like, I learned about it in the context of parenting, and I thought, I'm like, what? If I don't tell my kids what they're doing wrong, how will they know, right? And so I just kind of, whatever, I don't know about that stuff. And then I got my role at AEP, and I was like, oh, this is so much responsibility. I want to do things right. I had to have a courageous conversation with someone, so I picked up the compassionate communication again and used that, and just found that, like, wow, the person doesn't even necessarily need to know that I had a real problem with them or that I was angry or anything like that, because it's more, one, learning to take care of my own feelings. Like, yeah, they're totally real and valid, whatever feelings I'm feeling about that situation, but they're mine to own. And that's a big journey in learning and working with youth, because running the program, things happened that were terrible. My uncle, he had a stroke, and they did not check his airway or his heartbeat. They left him lying on the floor in his urine. The one action they took was they called my cousin and said, your uncle's drunk, come clean him up. 5 hours later, she got the call, she went in, she said, he's not drunk, he has a 16-year history of strokes, that's why he's living in the elders' home. He got medevaced, he passed away. So you can imagine that trauma and then the impact that has on your kids and your family to know that you are considered less than human. And the mental health impacts that had who are phenomenal. Meanwhile, I'm running this leadership development program in AF. So you have to learn how to take care of all those feelings and ground yourself so that when you show up, you go from trauma to showing up to taking a busload of youth on a trip to gathering our voices for the next 4 days. You have to be like present, grounded, because they are so attuned to when you are not, when you're not in integrity, when you're not grounded. Yeah, some key pieces around the internship program: listening to youth, making space for Indigenous people, knowledge and practice. I would love a policy that would just be like nothing about us without us. We start our meeting, we ground in an acknowledgement, the territory, we have a look around. Do we have any Indigenous people at the table? No. Let's pause and let's go get them and bring them in and make space. And then if we only have one Indigenous person at the table, how do we privilege their voice to be equal or above the 6 other non-Indigenous voices at the table so that we're not further tokenized? So I don't know, I've said a lot, so I hope you took a few notes. And thanks so much for listening to me. And I just want to end with the youth are our future. I one night woke up 3 times saying the future, the answer lies in our youth, and I went back to sleep. I said it again, and that's something I truly believe. If there's only one thing we did, it was invest in our youth and bringing them in. That would help us a long way. So, Hachka, thank you.
So in thinking about work power and circles of influence, again, it's shifting from all of the things that we don't understand as yet around how reconciliation works, or working with newcomers and helping them find inclusive workplaces and all of that, to finding a starting point for us to share our stories. And I believe that's what's happened this afternoon.
Thank you for taking the time here to, out of your day, your weekend. And last but not least, I'd like to ask my sister to come up and close us off and see us off.
Thank you again to each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to speak from your heart, to listen with your heart, to take something new away with you today that you didn't know.